This is Pamela Nelson with the Grounding and Growing Leadership Podcast powered by Align. And this is episode number 18. We are really excited to be welcoming Josh Hoaby. Josh is a young leader and the executive director of creative arts in a nonprofit. And today we are going to be talking about defining the win. This is so key for all of us as leaders, but specifically as Josh not only has to work with people who are on the clock and paid, he also has to motivate and lead people who are volunteers. I think that you are going to find a uniqueness in Josh's voice as a young leader, and you are not going to want to miss this episode on defining the wins.
Welcome to the Grounding and Growing Leadership Podcast, where everyone is a leader and leadership starts with you. I'm Tara.
And I'm Pamela.
Thank you for listening and inviting us along on your leadership journey.
We are so excited that you are here today with us because we have a special guest. Tara and I have invited Josh Hoaby. We're very excited that he is here. I'm going to have Tara give the intro because you are going to want to know about this exciting, and we're going to call you a young leader, Josh. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that checks out. Absolutely.
Does it check out? Okay.
Yeah.
So excited to have this conversation with you. Tara, give us the intro.
Yeah, Josh is an executive director of creative arts at Calvary Church in Golden Valley, where he leads the weekend experience team, which is worship, production, guest experience, social media teams, large events, internships, and a number of other areas where he has influence. Josh leads a team of over 70 team members, from volunteers to 1099s to full-time team members. That's a large team, Josh.
Yeah, it's grown in the past 2 or 3. It's about doubled, which has been great.
Because how many members does Calvary Church have?
Yeah, we see about 1,000 people on a weekend.
Yeah.
And church attendance is so different right now, but we have about 3,000 members, people that we would consider that. Yep.
So you're serving a large population, a large group. So Josh has a passion for leading people and helping them to become the very best version of themselves, both personally and professionally. He's been leading in nonprofits, churches, for over 12 years and has spent the last few years equipping other churches and worship leaders to clarify their wins, establish goals for weekend experience, and how to recruit and lead their teams well. Josh is very much a growing leader. He says by no means has it figured out, but I know we're going to learn a lot from him today. And we are just excited to have you with us. Welcome, Josh.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, we're getting into a groove with guests. And one of the things we ask right up top is, what are your top 5 strengths and which one is serving you best right now?
Yeah, so my top 5 are belief, achiever, responsibility, self-assurance, and competition, which I've been told by you, Tara, is a complex profile.
It's an intense profile, Josh.
An intense profile. Yeah, there you go. But responsibility, I think, is the strength that I feel most connected to right now, transitioning into my new role, overseeing more than just the weekend, and having to have more organizational responsibility rather than just a responsibility for my team or my people, but really the organization as a whole is something that I've had to lean into and to really grow in the past months.
How do you take that on, Josh, without having it be weighty?
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about my role is that the new people that I'm overseeing, or the additional responsibility and influence that I have, the relationships were already there. So I'm not trying to develop and build a ton of new relationships if I was going in as an executive director into a new nonprofit. I'm just moving into a different role in my current environment. So that helped a lot because I already had personal relationships and felt responsibility and care for the people that I'm leading. I didn't already have to develop that. It was just there. So it allowed me really to dive in right away and to lead well.
Nice.
And I love that we're having you on today. The thing that we're going to talk to you the most today about is the importance of defining wins. And your top 5 strengths are really wired to really need to define your wins, right?
Totally.
So responsibility wants to meet expectations. Achiever wants to get it done. Self-assurance wants to have a lot of confidence in doing that. And competition likes to benchmark progress. And all of that, you're just probably uniquely wired to notice that.
Yeah, didn't realize that's how I was wired until I understood and learned about what wins actually are. And it's like, wow, this really makes sense to me. Why don't I have this in everything that I'm leading and everything that I have influence of? So it's been fun to help all of our other teams in our organization to develop wins, to understand why they're important, to know how they're winning and how to communicate that well with their teams as well.
So Josh, I think a lot of our listeners might not be used to thinking about church and church leadership and the concept of wins or winning. So we're really excited to have you dive into that. But before we do that, could you take us back? As Pamela said at the beginning of the podcast, that you are, quote unquote, a young leader, but I've known you a long time and you've had leadership qualities from the beginning. But tell us, how did you end up here today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thinking about it, it's difficult to think back and have an origin story just because I am a younger leader. But thinking back, I've always just naturally found myself in leadership situations. Sometimes I would naturally put myself in there, or sometimes people would ask me to step up and do things. But I didn't realize that I had influence as a leader until I was in my early 20s. And I didn't feel like I began to understand what type of leader that I wanted to be or what type of leader that I was until my early 30s. And I'm still ironing it out. But I remember vividly running sound at the church that I was previously at for an event, like a leadership conference, and listening to the speakers and everybody who was really inspiring, and just sitting back, not necessarily thinking that I was get anything out of it because I was just the tech guy at that point, and thinking through, wow, all these things make sense to me. And there's no reason why I can't be implementing all of these things into my current situation and have this sort of influence over my current volunteers and my current leaders. That really was the spring point for me to be like, wow, am I a leader? Can I be a leader? Am I qualified to be a leader? And then digging in to what that was, what I felt like made a great leader, calling and asking people who had no business talking to me to talk to me about leadership, which was great and something that I always recommend to people that I talk to about being a young leader now. But interesting thing about being a young leader, it's a really interesting place to be because in context, you're typically leading people who are very much older than you, which is interesting. Sometimes they can be 40 years older than you. We were just talking in one of my teams a few weeks ago that if I'm leading worship on stage, sometimes I can have 4 different generations on stage and we have to communicate the same information 4 different ways in a way that everybody's going to understand and be able to take it to the finish line in the same way. So it's really interesting as a young leader that you often have to lead up. So learning how to do that has been critical for me as a young leader.
Thanks for saying that. Back in a past life, Josh, I did the same. And so I have a unique understanding of what that takes to be able to get there. For me, we didn't even have the luxury of having a band. Yeah. We had to start with a shaker egg. So I'm really dating myself. But I wanted to say that as a young leader, you're not only communicating to that team of different generations, but then you also have these 4 generations who are listening to you in the audience as well, that you have to be able to engage them. And especially when it comes to music or what's in your field, worship, where we are inviting them to sing with or participate with. How is that translated then to be able to communicate to the generations who are listening to you, who you also want to participate with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that'll circle back, I assume, when we talk about wins too. But one of our main wins for all of my teams is that we want people to participate. And we measure that on a weekend through vocal participation. So everything that we do drives our people singing. And when, like you said, Pamela, when you're leading a congregation of multi-generations, you have to figure out how can we get this one body of people to all be on the same page and be unified in what we're doing. And that takes a lot of work up front and a lot of planning and a lot of intentionality that 90% of the people won't know about, but it comes across really well. So everything from the keys we sing songs in to how often we play songs to what the lyrics are to are we going to tag a hymn, all of those things drive towards that win. Are people singing along with us?
For our listeners, some of you maybe aren't aware of how different kinds of churches are run and leadership that's required. Pamela, your first career was worship as a worship leader, or one of your first careers as a worship leader. And actually, you both served at the same church at different times. Which is wild.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Pamela, can you give the listeners, I think everyone listening, just a little bit of a taste of all of the different dynamics that you have to keep in mind when you're leading from the front of a church?
Yeah, I think this is really an important topic of conversation because what you see when you lead in front, there is so much work, as Josh said, that goes into the backside of it. Even from the communication of the creative team who you work with on an executive level. So you have responsibilities as an employee of the church to this team who has vision cast everything that's going on for the day. And Josh, I want you to talk more about that. Yeah. But then there is also the engaging with people who are there. So you are very aware that you have pre-done all of the practicing, I would say, like all the planning is there. But then in the moment, you also have to be very ready for perhaps a song or a emotion or something that happened in the world globally that people are coming to you as they're walking in the door. They're walking in sometimes really excited about something, or sometimes something feels very heavy. And so you're very aware that your position there is to help to take off what feels heavy and place it on in the faith realm, a God who is able to take that and carry it for them. So that weight of being incredibly aware of everything that's happening. And Josh, I love that you said responsibility, that you don't take that lightly. So I just really want to encourage a leader in any position. Where is it on any other team that you have to carry that kind of weight every time you stand in front of the whole team? It's an incredibly complicated role. And so I think this is really important to discuss for leaders at all levels.
I think the question I get most asked from people who've never worked in churches, who don't know anything about that realm, is, so do you do this full time? You get that question all the time. You don't just do this on Sunday morning? So no, there's a lot that goes into it. But like you said, Pamela, there's a ton of thought and a ton of process that goes into what actually happens on Sunday morning. But like you said, you have to be ready in the moment to be able to read the room and to spin off in wherever the room needs you to go at the moment. And I think, like you said, people are coming in. Some people might be on a high, some people might be on a low. And the hard part is that could be the exact same thing. Something might have happened in the world where people are really excited about, and the same thing people are really down about. So how do we create an environment that allows people to just focus on God, is my whole thing. How do we lead people up to in that space where they're going to be able to hear whatever the pastor is going to say? Because my role isn't the biggest thing that happens on Sunday morning. It's to set everybody up to hear whatever our pastor's last point is.
It's interesting because you have in a church environment an opportunity to interact with every single stakeholder every single week.
Yeah.
And that is not something that most businesses have to deal with. Yes, we are working with clients and customers. Yes, we're working with constituents, maybe board members, maybe, but also your team members. But those are usually happening independent and maybe concurrently, but not all at the same time. So that's a unique situation to be in.
Yeah. It's like having a board meeting every week and just everybody's there all the time.
You're in a unique position where people feel free to give you feedback all the time, whether you are soliciting and inviting it or not. Some of us have to send out a customer survey if we want to know what people think. And people in the church world tend to just come out and tell you to your face in an email.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. The best is on Sunday morning when they just walk up after everything has happened. But yeah, there are no shortage of opinions in the church world. And that's one of the things that is unique to church and one of the things that we encourage, because when we're talking about having a relationship with God the Father, it's a very emotional thing. So when we are encouraging people to have that type of relationship, they bring those emotions in with them, and they're so passionate about their relationship and their growth that can come off as asking questions about why we do things and all of that. But my go-to is always circling back to the why we're doing what we're doing. And the unfortunate thing for a lot of Christians who have been around for a long time is the why we're here on Sunday morning typically has nothing to do with you. You're already a Christian. You already have that relationship. We want to continue to help you grow in that. But Sunday morning, from a lens of influence, is primarily, it's the best place for a new Christian or a guest. That's the first place they're going to come. So the why behind everything we do is for somebody who doesn't know Jesus yet. And so our big motto is, how do we help somebody experience God in a new way today? And if you've experienced God in so many different ways, sometimes what we do might not be for you, but clarifying the why and talking people through that, help them to get on board with that mission, and then they get it. And it only takes a few times to have those conversations with people before they're like, oh, there's intentionality behind everything that we do. Not that your emotions and your opinion doesn't matter, because it does. It really does matter. And I'm always happy to talk to people who are passionate about that stuff. But when we bring it back to the why we do what we do on Sunday morning, it gets everybody on the same page, which is great.
Yeah. How do you do that with a bunch of creatives on your team, Josh? Not a lot of people have a paid team that work with you, everywhere from behind the sound system. And being a creative, you're wanting to use your gifts in a certain way, typically. How do you work through those volunteers to get them on board with that same why, but also that same mission and ultimately that level of responsibility that you want to give them without it being weighty for them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, leading creatives is very different. They're a different breed. And I think me being a creative, leading creatives, I think helps. It probably helps and it probably hurts all at the same time. But we have a saying on our teams that there are no bad ideas and no hurt feelings. So all ideas are welcome on the team. If we choose not to do it, it's not because we don't like you as a person. It's just not, that idea isn't going to help us win right now. So we bring everything back to the why. We bring everything back to the wins. Does this idea help people participate more than they have? Does this idea help people come back? Does this idea eliminate distractions? And if the answer is no to any of those, then we don't do it. And it's not that we don't value your idea or your opinion. It's just, it's not going to help us win right now.
Yeah.
I love that. And I want to repeat it for people, the no bad ideas and no hurt feelings. Not long ago, we did an episode on emotional maturity. And if you're looking for a quick framework to help build that resiliency with your team, I think that is really powerful. No bad ideas and no hurt feelings. We struggle just in general with receiving feedback and it does become personal. But then in the business world, we pretend like it's not emotions that we're dealing with. Yeah. At least there's some honesty, right? With some of the work that you do, it is emotional and it's supposed to be emotional. But the truth is we bring our emotions wherever we go. Yeah. So being able to deal with it straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah. And it takes work. Like saying that and putting it on a whiteboard is one thing. Hey, we're going to have all ideas are welcome and we're not going to have hurt feelings. But the reality is people's feelings are still going to get hurt until you develop that culture with your team that it's not personal. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of one-on-one conversations that, hey, this idea was great, just not in this context. So making sure that it's not just something we say, but something that we live out and something that we influence in all of our teams and people one-on-one too.
Can you go just a little bit deeper there, Josh, and maybe tell us a little bit about some examples without naming names, but some examples or some ways that you have to be intentional around bringing people along with that one concept alone?
Yeah. We're always trying to do new things, and sometimes the new things for the sake of new isn't always the right answer. So we try to always make sure that we're always pushing forward. We never want to be saying we're doing the same thing that we did 2 or 3 years ago. We want to make sure that our wins and our values in the framework, and it's still Calvary, but the what it is and the how we're doing it is always changing. And when you have that mindset and you have the mindset of always new ideas, it gives a lot of people an opportunity to speak their mind, which is great. But for every 10 ideas, there's only one event and only one thing that we're going to do. So it's a lot of getting in a room and whiteboarding it out. And it's a lot of brainstorming, and creatives love to brainstorm as much as they probably say that they don't love it. They love getting in a room and just talking through the issues and having hour-long meetings about what that is. So as a leader, it's my job to keep everybody centered and focused on where we're going, not necessarily what we're going to do when we get there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And you talked earlier, not only about that space of being creative, but about creating that culture that is really across the board in all the areas at the church that you are serving. Let's talk a little bit about bringing that culture in, if you could. And then again, that unique space that you sit both in serving on staff, but then in developing the people and the culture who are volunteer to you and to make them want to be there. And for all intents and purposes, on a really snowy day in Minnesota, which is where this church is, that I'm not sleeping in after I had a gig on Saturday night, but I'm actually going to show up, and what is the culture that I've created to get them there and want to be there.
Yeah, I think when I first came, that definitely wasn't the culture here at Calvary where I am. And that's not a knock. It's just the reality of what it was. So getting everybody, the core people who were here, excited about pursuing excellence was the big thing here at Calvary First. Because in Minneapolis, which is a highly church saturated area where we have a lot of mega churches, there's excellence in church all around us. Musicians and people want to be part of something that's great. And people who attend your church want to invite their friends and family to something that's great and something that's powerful. So instilling that value of we're going to pursue excellence in everything that we do really motivated everybody to step up their game, to show up for rehearsals, ready to go. Pamela, as a worship leader, did you even look at the email that I sent you this week or whatever it is?
Yes.
So we just set up some basic things like we want to come to rehearsal service ready, so that if a random crowd was here and we needed to put a church service on, that we were ready to go. So just some of those expectations that will help us to dig into the details during rehearsals and before services is what made it fun, because creatives don't like the nuts and bolts. They love the details of it all. They don't want to just mess around with what chords we're playing. They want to know how the chords are going to get from one to the other and how the harmony and the vocals get into this and where the drum fill is going to go. They want to dig into those details, but we can't unless we are ready to go when rehearsal starts. And it's the same way for when we're talking about creating vision for new ideas and new things. We have to come to those sessions ready to go so that we can just iron out all the nuts and bolts. So that's really been a process from musicians to everything that we're doing at executive level now too.
And I love that, again, you spoke of the generations that are trusting you as the leader, and even the team that you serve in as the whole church staff, that they're trusting you to be that bridge between the visionary team and those that are on the executive team, and being the bridge then to the creatives, which is, again, as a person who's grown in that area, where have you found your greatest learning space, or sometimes I would call it my humbling space of being a leader, of interpreting the vision of leadership to those that are then serving on the platform team or behind the scenes? Where have you grown the most in that area over these last years, Josh?
Yeah, I think I personally have grown in owning the decision and owning the mission, whether or not I completely agreed with it from day one. I think as a young leader, you're so inclined to like, hey, we're going to do it, but I had this great idea that probably would have been absolutely phenomenal, right? But as a leader and the responsibility that I have now, it's okay, this is the direction that we've decided as a vision team that we're going to go, and we're going to give it 110%. And then my job is to create trust between the vision team and my teams. Hey, this is the best direction that we think we can go to help us win and to help the majority of people have a new growing relationship with Jesus. So that's where we're going to go. And then the biggest part after all of that is what builds trust with those decisions is showing my teams that this is how it's working. We had an extra 100 people at this event that's different from last year. We had 10 people say yes to Jesus here. We had all of these things happening, and making sure that I'm letting my teams know of the good and the positive things that are happening, and then owning up when things didn't work. Owning up like, hey, we had this idea and it completely flopped, and we completely own that. Thank you for going with us and going 110% in the direction that we asked you to go. We recognize it didn't work, but now we're going to try something else. So it's a 3-part process for sure.
The whole time, Josh, that you've been sharing these examples and the learnings that you've had, it all ties back to the wins, doesn't it? Because you're
100%.
managing, you're aligning with the why that you're there, that purpose, and then you're really tightly managing those expectations with a lot of clarity. And I think that's where a lot of leaders struggle, is defining and really clarifying on a regular basis with teams.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's back up a little bit. Tell us about how you came to realize that defining wins was a key part of your leadership and your strategy. And then I want to dive back into the learning around it.
Yeah. Wins for me became a big deal. I read a book called 3 Miserable Signs of a Job by Pat Lencioni. And the whole book is basically like, how can I make sure that my team or my employees in the book are having fun at work and want to come back? And one of the big things was making sure that they had measurable things to know if they were doing a good job. So that really motivated me as an individual to be like, okay, how am I adding value to my organization? What are the measurable things that I can do? And then that coupled with an Andy Stanley book, 7 Practices of Effective Ministry. The first one is to clarify the win. Just meshing those two things together and bringing some people in with me. It's not like I didn't create the wins on my own. I brought a team of my current volunteers in St. Cloud and my current team here, and we came up with the wins together so that we had ownership of it, all of us together, which was great. And when we've done that, now it allows everybody to know without a doubt, hey, that decision was right because we won in this way. That decision was right because we won in this way. That decision didn't work because nobody showed up and didn't invite anybody, or whatever it is. But bringing everybody into that fold to clarify the wins helped with that ownership. But my personality, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, I love to win. I'm a fan. And I don't know how to win if I haven't put those wins in place. I'm just throwing a dart and hoping it hits something. So having a target for me was huge.
First of all, you're speaking our language, Lencioni and Andy Stanley.
Yeah, they're great.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you continue to pull attention back? I've heard a couple of things that I just wanted to point out. You're always looking at the event. You're having a conversation about it, right? So you're talking about what happened. How did it go? Did we win?
Yeah.
So you're breaking it all down.
Yeah, we debrief everything. So going into that, we clarify the wins for the event or whatever it is if we don't have any yet. And then all of the decisions going into the event are how can we make sure that we're accomplishing the wins? And then we debrief afterwards and we are brutally honest on if it was great or if it wasn't great.
Can I ask a question on that? Because I experienced often in that realm that we didn't take enough time to celebrate what went well.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
That it becomes really easy to Monday afternoon quarterback your Sunday service, right?
Yep.
And so how have you had that balance? Yes, you do want to get better, and yes, you do want to grow, but have you been able to stay long enough and soak in what was really impactful and really meaningful, which is about people having life change, whether or not a bass player played a wrong note at the wrong time or whatever. Like we can deal with that later, but like the impact that it had on people.
Yeah, and that's definitely part of our debrief process. It's always first, okay, what can we be celebrating right now? What went well? Where's the life change? Why did it happen? So we sit in that probably more than we sit in the where did it go wrong, because we've developed the culture where before we even get to the debrief, everybody knows what went wrong. So we don't need to talk about much of it. So we spend a lot of time in our debrief celebrating what happened over the weekend or over the event. And then for me as a leader, it's being really intentional about going up and celebrating one-on-one with the people who it happened with or it happened around or whatever. Going up somebody in our traditional rooms like, hey, I heard this about what happened in this venue. Awesome job. I just didn't know if you heard it. Because Pamela, a lot of times we just hear negative. So my job as their leader is making sure that they are continuing to be encouraged, because a lot of times we don't see the positive as often. So making sure that it's always in front of people is huge. Just like you said, for sure.
So you're taking to celebrate and you're pointing out what went right. We're going to have to continue this conversation with you because we're running out of time, but I feel like we're just getting started. We'll have a part 2. We're going to have a part 2 where we're going to dive back into this. As we're closing this episode, could you just maybe talk about if there's someone listening who's a leader and they struggle to bring their people along, what's one piece of advice where they can start?
Yeah, figure out where you want to take them to. People have a hard time following if there's not a destination, and it doesn't need to be something super clear. It's just, hey, we're gonna go this way, and sometimes that's enough for people. But people have a really hard time following a leader who have no idea where they're going. So it's figuring out the direction that you want to take your team and the wins and the values around you as a leader and whatever your team is, and then circle everything around that, and it goes pretty quick, which is great.
And I love that there's intentionality around that, because I think a lot of leaders think it's very clear about where you're going because they said it once in a meeting a month ago. And you're bringing them back to that, right?
Yeah, every time we sit down, it's here are the wins. This is where we're going. Let's get going. Yep.
Awesome. Josh, thank you so much. Can't wait for part 2.
Yeah, thank you.
Come on.